Hello, my name is Tisa. Um, I had to re-record this, so I hope this one is just as good as the first one. For some reason, I think my video was too big. I mean, my it was a voice recording and it was too long. So knowing that it was too long, I know I'm not going to be able to go through everything in the course or the course material, because that last audio was 45 minutes long, and I realize now that that was just ridiculous. So I'm just going to go through just really briefly. I'm going to try and squeeze in as much as I can. Um, so, well, I guess first off, my name is Tisa Casius. I'm taking anthropology from Saskatoon. I am an art student, majoring in psychology. I'm in my second year. They don't offer too many psychology classes at First Nations University, so I'm looking to either move to Regina next year or possibly transferring to the U of S so I can start taking my psychology classes. I only got to get in one last year. Um, so this is one of my electives that I chose, and to be honest with you, I was not sure what anthropology was at all. Um, so I signed up for the class and I googled anthropology a couple times, and I was like, okay, well, this is really interesting. I think I'll like this class, and here I am. So we'll start with anthropology. The definition of anthropology is the study of um, like people, humans, and I heard a term on a YouTube video of it's a study of all people, all places, anywhere, anytime, somewhere along those lines. And in anthropology, there's five subfields. There's physical and biological anthropology, and from my understanding, this is one of the oldest subfields. And this is just basically focused on human beings of many organisms that live on Earth. We're just one of many organisms. And like just kind of studies like what characteristics make us similar to or different from other living things. Um, Also, forensic anthropology falls into the bi- biological anthropology. I just had a side note of that. Also, archaeology. This is something cool. Archaeology, to me, I always thought this was its own study. I thought it was like its own thing. I didn't know that this was a subfield of anthropology. So, archaeology. So that's something new that I learned. It's just a subfield where humans. It's like on human history and artifacts that are studied, looking at material or remains to piece together how groups of individuals used to live. Basically, it's like old stuff that was my idea coming into it and realizing that archaeology was this. But then I had learned something else in this class is that nowadays, it's not just used for the extinct. People actually hire archaeologists to work for them. Like there was an example in the lecture video online that said that there was a Pringle company that had hired archaeologists to kind of dig through garbage, and that was one of the examples. I'm sure there's probably a lot more other ways that they went about finding that evidence for these Pringles and for that company. But yeah, these archaeologists went in, dug in the garbage, and did whatever they did, and they were trying to find like an age of when or who was eating these Pringles. And they were surprised when they found out that it was like 60. The age was between 65 and 85 years old. And I guess more research and whatever had went into it. I think it's like archaeologists have to play. I think it's like socio anthropologist, um, and just try and figure out and ask questions like what's their everyday life, example like portion size, and there's a lot of steps to it, I guess. But they had found that out, and the reason why if that was the age category was because Pringles are more accessible for like they come in small cans with a lid, easier to store in cupboards. And I think like Pringles are like chip shards made into chips, so they're like dissolve really easy. And I think that's those are all reasons why the elderly would want Pringles over, hard chips like Doritos or something else. So, and the third subfield is linguistics. Linguistics is just a relationship where language and culture is explored. How people use language, like structural, historical sense, by researching how different things and how different languages have developed, how they were spread, why are some languages not used anymore or not being passed on. Language can tell a lot about a culture and they can shape cultures. They're dynamic, like interesting. Um, and one of the examples that was in the lecture also was a person that went to Peru, I think it was, and they had realized that only the men could speak English over there. So then they asked questions like, well, why is this so? And then they realized that, they learned to speak English because they needed to survive, because there was, there's a Western entity there, mining or plantation, whatever it was there, they had to speak English. So that's why a lot of women, it wasn't that women couldn't or didn't learn it. I'm sure there probably was a lot that could speak English, but there just wasn't a huge like distinction in that language, in the English language out there for to say like, yeah, everybody equally. It was mainly the men that spoke it, and I think what their conclusion was that the women, stayed home and tended to the children. It wasn't that they weren't allowed to learn it. There just really wasn't any use for it for them. Um, and yeah, so that was something really cool and a different perspective on language and things like that. Um, Also, the fourth subfield is a sociocultural anthropology, and this is the main focus of the course, I believe. And it's basically like how societies are structured and how societies are structured and how cultural meaning is created. Like we look at the differences, also try find similarities and what it is to be alive and to be human. So there's lots of like cross-cultural comparison. Like you look at it, you describe it, you interpret it in the best ability that you can, and you look at it from a different culture, and you ask some questions that are, better to understand, um, rather like what it is to be alive, or what it means to be human. You ask questions like that, and ask yourself questions like that. So that's pretty interesting. Um, the fifth one is applied anthropology, and apparently this is an emerging field. It's emerging tested field. Like it's kind of, they say, I think that it's a weakened, watered down type of research versus like pure anthropology. At least that's what's argued. Um, and so they use like all five of the subfields, I guess, to try and gain knowledge, or you use it to and you apply it to like the real world, like the Pringle experiment, right? That's more contemporary, and it's more contemporary and like for contemporary issues that are used like outside of the academia rather than like, you know. And we talked about culture. The anthropological perspective is the learned set of behaviors and ideas that's learned by individuals through social relationships. So basically, it's a system of like social knowledge that's shared by a group of individuals within society or within one culture. And like different cultures all around us, it's vast, it varies. Like a speed skater to like a hockey player was one of the examples that was in the lecture. So in culture, there's five characteristics. There's learned characteristics, symbols, shared. It's either a pattern or integrated, and it's usually adaptive. And I could go into all of those into a little bit more detail, but there's a lot of things that I want to touch on in the next 5 minutes. So very briefly, learned is just like how to act like appropriately, or whatever you learn, you watch, you get disciplined and scolded for doing bad things, and you learn to, you know, and just like by watching and making mistakes. Symbols is just something that stands for something else. Like you see something and you know what it is. Shared, we pass it on constantly. It's changing. It's plural. And pattern or integrated, um, it's just a system of understanding. And then there's usually like that usually adaptive. It's not static, so it's used daily. Like culture, like the way you learn, it's like constant. You could learn things constantly, and that's my understanding of it, anyways. And so there's a relativistic fallacy that I thought was a really cool term in anthropology, and it's basically just a different way to address them from like an anthropologic way, like to approach another culture is to be like relativistic. Like you want to be relativistic because relativistic fallacy is it's that idea that it's impossible to make moral judgments about the beliefs and behaviors of certain members of other cultures. Like it's just impossible. You can't. That was a really old way. And that's kind of like the way I interpret that. That's like the settlers and the Indians. Like they were to the settlers, First Nations people were savages and all that. So now it's like a different perspective, and it's to understand that these cultures have meaning in the things that they do. So to be relativistic in any practice or action in any culture, it's tolerated. So as long as they can demonstrate logic or valuing in what they can, and what they give to, whatever culture it is that they're doing, whatever they're doing in that culture. I mean. So, like an example, it's like culture practices child sacrifices. If we were to, if we were too relativistic, we would not be able to judge that practice. We would ask why instead. Like why would they do that? Why would they have they always done things this way? Anthropology is an analysis, and it's you just ask like, is this wrong, or am I just being too Western? Do I have a big of like, is my perspective too Western? Like that old way. And then we get into ethnocentric fallacy, and that's the mistaken notion that the beliefs and behaviors of other cultures can be judged from the perspective of one's own culture. So that's that opinion that like right, true, correct way, only true way attitude, right? And most individuals, we all carry around this ethnocentrism around. Like example, we all brush our teeth, wear clothes, sleep in beds in order to understand how we do things, And just that judge and devalue of others is are wrong and immoral, and you just want to be more relativistic about that situation, or when you're viewing other cultures, it's just the right way to do it. And then we get into ethnocentrism action, like the challenge. This was a video, the guys jumping around doing jumping jacks, and the ethnocentric idea was that, oh, these guys can't even do jumping jacks. They're like, a child can do jumping jacks, and then initially right away you want to protect them, and you think that they can't. So you can't. Can you shut the door, please? Like, I can't pause my video, so right now, like, sorry about that. So, what was I saying? Oh yeah, ethnocentrism action. The challenge was the jumping jacks, and so we learned how to do jumping jacks. Like these adults in the video, they couldn't, and a child could. They couldn't, and we made them into children in our heads. They need to be protected. Question mark, question mark. A different perspective is their culture never needed to learn to do these kinds of things. So why are we making them childlike? Their culture never knew how to do jumping jacks, but jumping jacks is something I've learned in elementary school. It was something that we did in phys ed, to get exercise, but in some cultures they didn't. And so if you don't pause your ethnocentrism, you could wind up being very ethnocentric, right? And so you want to be relativistic as as much possible when in anthropology, as being able to view each person's perspective, you know, as their own without any kind of judgments or and whatnot. And then we did the reading on the Nakarima. I think I'm saying that right. Backwards spelt America. I thought that was pretty funny and interesting because that's exactly to me the way it relates with the way I interpreted it is that video is basically like anthropology. That's like the perfect example of anthropology because the way like our rituals and everything, how they portrayed it out to be something so um, like it was almost kind of weird, and um, but that's how we, when you really shine a light on something like that, like the bathroom, out where we go and wash up and brush our teeth and all these things. Somebody from another culture who, let's say somebody who's never been, um, had any kind of contact with the Western world or anybody, like people living on a vast, like faraway island who's never seen any other culture, comes to Canada or America. I guess America is the best, and sees these people going in and out of the bathroom, like, you know, they could either be ethnocentric, ethnocentric, sorry, or they could be relativistic. And that's the idea I think that I got from that, is that it's, another perspective of looking at things rather than for just how weird and whatever, however it makes you feel, or if it's strange or just different. Like, you have to try and understand that this is their way of life, and respect that. So then we talk about critical cultural and relativism. There's a whole bunch of examples that they use it for. Just to name a few, it's like, are these things incorrect, critical, current, new story? Understand, is there a power or a dynamic? Are people being forced to do things against their own will? And for an example, was that being Canadian and just bills being passed for reporting barbaric and cultural practices. So that's implied that it lacks morals and ethics, and it's lower down of a scale of like what's right or wrong, I guess. And laws to come from that bill were like head coverings, or laws on polygamy, increase the age of marriage to 16. Polygamy is not allowed in Canada, and all of those were challenged. And but they were also all valued by a culture, So like this bill being passed, it's ethnocentric, and you don't want that. You want to be relativistic. That's what I got from that. So there's still a lot of current things that happen in the world that like it's still like a lot of inequalities, especially for like newcomers. And we want to welcome people into our culture, and say that you're free and to practice your culture and your own views and religious things that you do. But at the same time, we're not used to their religions, so then we want to make bills to impose them. Like, it doesn't make sense, and it's not fair. But there are some really barbaric like rituals and things that other cultures do that we're not used to. So I can understand both sides of that. I just don't know what's right, honestly. And we talk about quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative is just research that involves like surveys, and like it focuses on um, like surveys like numbers, or what of preferences and behaviors, not the like how and the whys, which is what qualitative research does. So anthropology uses qualitative research more than quantitative. They use both, but just more qualitative because, like I said, it asks more questions of how and why rather than just what, and what it is. Um, and then there's ethnographic method. It's a research method in which social cultural anthropologists have intensive long-term engagements with a group of people. It may involve like the use of both quantitative and qualitative methods. So like long-term engagement with individuals includes both qualitative and quantitative research methods, because that's qualitative is usually what anthropologists use. So and you're just basically trying to get as much analysis as you can from your research. So and then there's participation observation, and it's just the active participant of research or observer in the lives of those being studied. So like we involve ourselves in the daily lives of those being researched, actively participating in their daily lives. So like you try to understand another culture basically by participating and observing. And then there's field work, and that involves like the meeting of people of at least two cultures, like for example that of the researcher and that of the culture, and the people the researcher is trying to understand. So it's just like observation. Like an example was what she said about the speed skater and the hockey player. The speed skater would be the dominant culture because she wants to know how to be a hockey player. So she needs to learn how to be a hockey player, tape, the stick, and the gear on, all that stuff. And then we watched video number 3, field work, and this is just where one person was working with refugees that were coming to America. Just like citizen education. They talked a little bit about discrimination. And then there was another one that went to go and learn how to make cheese. And that was really hands-on. That was like participant observation. And then there was marine biology, the ocean world. Really insightful ways and different ways to study what you're studying. That video was really like it gave you an idea of as what you do as an anthropologist, right? Participation observation, an anthropological research technique that involves observation of and participation in the daily life of the people being studied. In order to do that, you need an informed consent. And this is basically just it just stems from like our commitment to our participants. Basically, it helps give them like a degree and agency and control over the info that they share, and it lets people be aware that like our goals and our intentions and what like just basically what just letting them know that like you have a degree of like what you want to share with the person that's researching your culture, anthropologist or so what anthropologists generating is basically like there's ethnography, and it's like a written description and analysis of an anthropologist's experience and interactions with a group of people. And it's just like in ethnography there's 3 forms. There's written form, video form, and film form. And they're just descriptions and analysis of their experiences and the individuals that they're studying. So there's 2 terms that are used a lot in anthropology. There's emic and etic. Emic is just like it's like the native or lived point of view, like the insider's perspective, like the culture, whichever culture that you're going to research, they're the emic. And the etic is usually the anthropologist. That's the starting point, a description of behavior or belief by an observer in terms that can be applied to other cultures. An etic account is usually culturally neutral. So emic is insider perspective, etic is outsider's perspective, like the anthropologist. We went into a lot like representation of cultures to essentialism. I have lots of notes on these stuff. Basically, representation of cultures is like how do we depict the groups of people we study. some representations can be incorrect or misguided, or yeah. And like essentialism is just the act of creating generalizations or stereotypes about the behavior or culture of a group of people. So like head war, like nuns. When people see nuns, they think of devotion. When people see Muslims, they think of oppression, or you know, whatever assumptions that we make about people and judgments equals essentialism. So we don't want to be essentialism or have that essential idea. We want to try and be relativistic as much as possible when you're an anthropologist. Then we went into like talk about other anthropologists, early anthropologists like Edward B. Tyler, um, who's like the definition of culture. Tyler believed in the evolution of culture. Um, and there's a little quote about culture, civilization. I won't read it because I don't have really much time. And there's Franz Boas. He did salvage anthropology, which is a common research method during his time, and was the first anthropology to push for a relativistic approach to anthropology research. So he fought against like linear and hierarchy. Um, there's a bunch of notes on him that I have. Anthropology is different now because Franz pushed for a relativistic approach. So that's pretty cool. And then there's Malinowski, Art of the Armchair. And yeah, he leaves the colonial house, sets up a camp, and did participation observation. He realized like the importance of field. He really realized the importance of field work, and he had to become a member of that society and that culture. And this is the way we have to do anthropology, is by being involved like that. And I think like something like this Malinowski out of the chair and the armchair, it reminded me of that new show that's on APTN. I think it's called Taken, where there's like 4 or 5 Caucasians that kind of go out into First Nations communities to try and get a better idea of how their lifestyle and how they're living, because there's so much racism going on right now. And yeah, that kind of related to me, and that's why when I was listening to that and reading about this in the lecture, I was like thinking, wow, like this is something. This is why this is, because how else are you going to learn? Like you can read about it, somebody could tell you stories, but I think like current issue wise, that's something that's relatable to that. And then video number 4 was that multi-sided field work. That Second Life game, that virtual real versus unreal type of idea. And this is like coming from Second Life, like these people that play the game, they argue that it's just as real for them as real life. So that's a different perspective, because a lot of people don't understand or take the time to think about like virtual reality and this and the time and things and everything that people put into that. Like it's real for them, whether you think it's unreal or real to you. Even though it's virtual, people still fall in love on things like that. So I think like the argument's fair either way. But culture shock, we talked about culture shock. It's just a disoriented feeling of stepping into a different culture. There's lots of there's stages of culture shock. There's honeymoon, anxiety, adjustment, and then acceptance. And then there's that emic or etic perspective. Can't understand it. Why do people do this, etc. And anthropologists need to know how to handle that kind of stuff. Talked about Wade Davis, Dreams of Endangered Cultures, where language is important. There used to be like 6,000 languages, and not half of them are around anymore, and elders are dying with their last syllables, which is really sad. This is something that's tied to a current issue right now with First Nations people as well, is the loss of language. Just going to give you a quick example of something that had happened over the summer. We had went back home to the reserve for our family feast. That's one of our traditions as an Indigenous person, is we have feasts every 4 years for our people that we've lost. It's our way of making sure that they're fed and that they're we can get into that another time, but We went to a feast, and it was supposed to be an afternoon early feast. We went out there early, super morning. We already had our elder lined up, but he had forgot he was supposed to come and do it for us. So when we had all the food cooked and we had everybody, people were lining up, coming in, getting ready, for the feast, and our elder wasn't there. And we couldn't get in contact with him right away. So we're phoning around trying to find another elder. And I was sitting there, we're sitting outside, my mom's on the phone, my auntie's on the phone, everybody's trying to, and I'm just like, oh my God, like really? Like they're like, oh yeah, there's said some name in Fishing Lake. We can call him, and then that was the end of the road. We couldn't get anybody to come and pray for our food. And and I was just like, oh my gosh, what happens when when our elder passes on? Who else are we gonna get? What happens next year or the year after? Like, he's already an older man, and that's the thing that's happening right now, is that loss of language, because those prayers that he earned those prayers, and to earn those prayers, it's a lot of work. It's commitment, and our people are already struggling with their own things, from residential school and that trauma that follows it. So that was really interesting to me, and I think that that's something current right now that's happening, and it's really sad, and we don't know what's going to happen, like that's just the way it is. So, but yeah, he talks about like our mother tongue, and restricts what we're able to think, and okay, I'll skip ahead. And then we read the case of the non dichotomous gender construction. um, I believe this is the one with the two-spirited people. Yeah, and that's something that I just learned from this class as well. Well, not from this class. I actually heard of two-spirited people in my women and gender studies class last year. So it was really neat to read up on this reading. And there was a whole bunch of other things. My video is already 32 minutes long. I'm not sure if I should continue. The last video went up to 46 minutes. I'm pretty sure you might not want to read, or I mean, listen to me just tell you everything that I learned. But I just want to say this, that I really enjoy this class. I've learned a lot. Like archaeology, like I said before, this is something that, or I don't know if I said it in this video, but I'm going to say it again, is that archaeology, I only ever thought archaeology was its own study. I didn't know it was a subfield to something. And it's really cool that they can use archaeology today for not saying that artifacts aren't real, but more, recent things, like companies hiring archaeologists. That's pretty cool. But I'm going to cut this off right now. I had a really hard time uploading my videos, my other blogs, so I had to make this YouTube video. But I mean, you can count it towards an audio. It doesn't matter to me. I just don't really look the best today, so I wasn't trying to make a video right now. But okay, this is Tisa Casius. This is my first anthropology blog on what I learned and how I retain the information from this class, and I enjoy it. I think the online, everything is so smooth. It's not hard to figure out where things go. Thank you very much. Stay blessed. Bye bye.